In tonight's Government Insider, another cyber attack. An investigation into a data breach at the IRS earlier this year has revealed the hack was much bigger than originally thought. How bad was it? Joining me tonight for some answers is Francis Rose, host of In Depth with Francis Rose on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. All right, Francis, the hack on the IRS happened months ago. What was the original report?
Well, the original report came in May, and it said that in February of this year, an attack began on an Internal Revenue Service database function called Get Transcript. And the Get Transcript function allowed people to log on to the IRS's website and download forms that they had submitted in the past. So you could go on there and pull down forms from previous tax returns. Using that information, hackers were then able to steal identities from people and claim their tax returns. This is an ongoing problem for the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS thought that originally it impacted about 110,000 people. That was the report that they issued back in May.
All right, now that brings me up to this question. Now officials say there's an additional 220,000 potential victims, pushing the total number to more than 330,000. Why did it take so long, Francis, for investigators to figure this out? And could the numbers grow like we saw in the recent OPM hack?
Well, cyber forensics takes time, and so their initial response was how many people they were able to ascertain immediately were impacted by this attack. What we note that they did not say at that time was that the attack was limited to 110,000 people or it affected only 110,000 people. There was no qualifying language like that that said this is it. That's pretty common in cyber attacks. And we see that kind of language both in the public sector and in the private sector. We saw that after the Target attack, for example. This many people were affected, but it wasn't definitive. And so this is just the IRS saying we've learned that this number of people, this additional 220,000 people have been affected by this. It's doubtful at this point that we'll learn that any more people have been affected by this than have been already, but there's no reason that at some point in the future they couldn't come back and say, we've learned that the number's bigger than we thought, like they've already done.
You know, many believe this latest attack was based in Russia, but the agency has been targeted by identity thieves before. In 2012, the IRS sent more than 600 tax refunds to a single address in Lithuania and more than 300 to Shanghai. How was that not flagged before the money was sent?
Well, apparently the Internal Revenue Service was not doing cross-checking and seeing how many checks were going to a particular address. They're able to do that now, and those kinds of data calls are in place now all across the government. The administration's put a tremendous priority on improper payments and figuring out where this money's going before it gets paid, rather than what's called pay and chase to people in the accounting business. But for a long time, the federal government was admittedly behind the curve when it comes to using the data that they collect and analyzing that information to be able to say, we're paying this many people who don't qualify for benefits or who shouldn't be getting the tax refunds or whatever, and then being able to look at that data holistically and say, this looks weird. We should go back and examine what's going on here in, for example, the cases that you mentioned, Morris.
Right. The hackers are doing us a favor, I guess, by pointing out our weaknesses. All right, let's switch gears. At a recent event, Secretary of Veterans Affairs Bob McDonnell talked about customer service challenges facing the agency, especially when it comes to their website. You called his remarks right on target. What did he say?
Well, what he said at an event that Politico hosted was, we should make it as easy as possible for veterans to figure out what's going on here. We come up with complicated names that aren't meaningful to the vets who use our services, and I think he's exactly right about that. The Blue Button program is a good example for that. It's a terrific program. It's an example of IT in the federal government done well, but nobody really knows what Blue Button means unless you have to go and use it. And so what Secretary McDonnell said was, why don't we get vets.gov or veterans.gov and use that as the simple website, as one place for vets to go and find all the information they want. And I thought that's really interesting, and I think that's right on target. I wonder what's at veterans.gov now. So I typed it into my web browser at work, and I saw this site that was all about veterans employment and transitioning from being a vet, being a member of the military to being a vet and going into the civilian workforce, and it was hosted by the Department of Labor. And so I wrote in a commentary on federalnewsradio.com WJLA.com that this is an indication of the customer service challenge that Secretary McDonald is up against. He's not just trying to deal with the Department of Veterans Affairs bureaucracy and the layers that are causing problems for vets there. He's up against other agencies in the federal government, and I've learned since I wrote that commentary that the Labor Department is not in a big hurry to give up that domain name. So that's a source of contention between two agencies of the federal government that theoretically are trying to do the same thing, which is to help veterans who've left the military and are trying to get back into the civilian workforce.
Inter-office politics, among other things.
Yeah.
Good to have you on board.
Thank
Francis
you.
Rose, host of In Depth with Francis Rose on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you, Morris.